This week's show has been sponsored anonymously. Lili Nishmas Reb Binyamin Zoltzbacher, Reb Binyamin Zal Ben Yvad Lechem Tov and Chav Eliezer. This is Shomer Shlav Aliyah. This week I want to focus on three questions. Firstly, how old was Avrom Avinu when he actually discovered Hashem? I'm sure you all remember when you were in school, you learned Avrom Avinu was 3 years old when he discovered Hashem. It's subject to debate, and I'd like to get into that a little bit. Second question. Lech Lecha begins very abruptly. We barely know Avrom Avinu. The end of last week's Sedra, we hear a little bit about his lineage. Terach, his wife, Sarai, they lived here, there. They tried to move to Eretz Yisrael, didn't quite make it. They made it to Choron. That's all we know about him. And then this week's Sedra begins, Lech Lecha, straight away with the first challenge of the 10 Nisyonis, the 10 challenges that Avrom Avinu is going to get. Why doesn't the Torah give us the tiniest of introductions to Avrom Avinu's background, his story? Who is he? Who are we talking about here? That's the second question I want to deal with. And thirdly, we know we've just mentioned the 10 tests that Avrom Avinu had. Now, the Mishnah in Ovis tells us that Asara Nisyonos Nisnas Avrom Avinu, there are 10 tests. There is a machlekes rishonim how you work them out, but we'll go with the Rambam. The Rambam says the first of the 10 was Lech Lecha. The Nisayon, the challenge was pick up, pack your bags, and move out. Go away from where you've been living with your family, where your hometown, where you're used to, and go El Ha'aretz Asher Areka, the Pasuk says, go where I will show you. Unless you think that the 10 Nisyonis were like one of those things, the Ramban writes in the Sefer Emuna B'Tochen Ramban. He says, even though we know Avram Avinu kept the whole Torah, it's written in places that he had 400 dafim to his Masechtas Avodah Zarah, whatever that means. We know he kept Eruv Tafshilin. He kept the whole shebang. Says the Ramban, though, that wasn't his greatness. His greatness wasn't the fact that he kept the Torah, because he didn't actually have to keep the Torah. And we know what Chazal tell us, Godel HaMetzuvah V'Isa, Mish'einu Metzuvah V'Isa. Someone who's commanded to keep is a lot greater than someone who's not commanded to keep. Avram Avinu wasn't commanded to keep the Torah. So therefore, the fact that he kept it wasn't his greatness. His greatness was the 10 tests that Hashem gave him. And as the Mishnah says, V'omad b'kulam. He absolutely withstood all of them. Fine, that's all the 10 Nisyonos. But if you think about it, Lech Lecha as the first of the 10. What's the big deal? He's told, move town. Yeah, it's like a big deal. But Hashem says to him, it's going to be to your benefit. You're going to get bracha from it. If Hashem appeared to any of us and said, look, I've got a challenge for you, move town, and it'll be the best thing for you. God himself is guaranteeing the best thing. What do you want? It's such a big deal. So that's the third question I want to try and deal with. Explain a little bit what exactly was the test. Why was it so difficult? So let's back up a second and let's get into the introduction, which I asked why the Torah doesn't give us, and we'll get to the answer later. But who was Avram Avinu? What was going on in his time? So the Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Halacha Aleph, basically lays out the scene to the time period, describes the time period to which Avram Avinu was born into. Now, even though we're only 10 generations after Noach, so surely there isn't that much to forget about the great almighty flood that Hashem brought to the world and all the great miracles along with Noach's survival. But the Rambam basically details how the entire population of the world, by the time Avram Avinu was born, had completely forgotten about Hashem. There wasn't a mention of Hashem. There wasn't anyone who believed in Hashem as God. Many of the masses would serve inanimate objects, just, grass, stones, etc. The wiser people would serve planets and stars. That's what the Rambam writes. But there was no one there who believed in Hashem. Comes along Avram Avinu as a child, says the Rambam. The Hischil lachshoiv bayoim uvalayla. Rachel Gimel, the Rambam explains. Avram Avinu as a child, inquisitive, curious child, looked around the world. He started to wonder, what is going on in this place? The world seems to nature seems to go round. The world goes round and no one's running the show. And the Rambam details he had no one to ask because he was surrounded by people who believed in inanimate objects having the power to run the world. His own parents served Avodah Zarah. There was no one else. But the Rambam explains how Avrom Avinu as a child pushed ad shehisig derech ha'emes until he reached the truth. He really questioned, he pondered, he really tried to get to the truth. And eventually, Avrom Avinu reached the truth, and he realized there's an almighty God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of the world, and he's the one that makes everything happen. And what age was Avrom Avinu when he reached this epiphany? Says the Rambam, 40 years old. Ben arboim shana hike Avram es boiroi. He recognized Hashem at 40. The Raavad, who always comments on the Rambam, when he does comment, he argues, he says, hang on a second. We know Avram Avinu found HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he was 3. In fact, it's a Gemara in the Dorim. The Gemara in the Dorim Lamed Beis says, Omar Rav Ami bar Abba ben Shalosh Shonim hike Avram es boiroi. How can the Rambam argue outright to the Gemara? The Rambam says 40, the Gemara says 3. What's going on? That's what the Raavad comments on the Rambam. The Kesef Mishnah answers, and I love his answer, is beautifully combining both opinions in a very constructive way. And the Kesef Mishnah says that at 3 years old, Avram Avinu began the journey of looking for Hashem. He started thinking. You can imagine, as I say, a 3-year-old being inquisitive, being curious. But he only actually finished his search. He only actually concluded his search at 40 years old. Can you imagine that? This is a journey, this is a quest that took 37 years. Do you realize that 37 years is sadly the lifetime of some people? That Arizal only lived 38 years. So Avram Avinu spent what for some people would be an entire lifetime searching for the truth. It's incredible to think about it. And on his own, without a single bit of help. He just continued to ask, to ponder, to really try and get to the truth of something. It took him 37 years, but he got there. 40 years old, he's finally arrived at this point, and Hashem comes to him, and Hashem says to him, pack your bags and go. So we've dealt with the first point. How old was Avram Avinu when he found Hashem? Now let's deal with the second point. Avram Avinu was being asked to move house. The truth is, our question when we asked, is this a big deal, isn't really a fair question. Rav Shmuel Bloom, who was the CEO of Agudah Yisrael in America for many years, relates a conversation which took place between a rich fellow in America who came into Rav Chaim Kanievsky very worried. This guy was living the dream. He was living a life. He had everything he wanted. Wife, kids, money, health, everything was fine. And he was worried. Maybe everything's too fine. So what's the matter if everything's too fine? Because we know Hashem doesn't let wicked people have olim abot. He gives them all the good in this world. So he came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky with a worry. Maybe I'm getting all the good in this world. So Rav Chaim says to him, have you ever had to move house? He said, yeah. He said, you don't have anything to worry about. Anyone who's moved house knows it's a big deal. It's a big deal to move house. And there's a medrash, Bereshis Rabosi, that says, Hatiltul kosher la'odom mikol gezeros koshes. Moving is the hardest thing. Kosher mikol gezeros. It's a hard thing. Packing up. Think of the olden days. It's a big deal. There were no taxis, there were no movable firms, there was no packing companies. It was a big deal. Okay. But we can make it even bigger than that. Because Avrom Avinu was not told where he was going to. There was no sophisticated knowledge in those days of lands around the world, of the globe, of what's going on in other countries. You didn't know what was happening. You didn't know the weather in the other country. You didn't know the lay of the land outside of where you lived. That's how it was. People lived very simply. So Avram Avinu had no idea outside Haran where he was going and what it was like. He had built up a community where he was. The Pasuk says that when he left and all those people he was Makariv, all those people he drew closer to Hashem, they left with him. He'd built up a community of thousands where he was, and Hashem is asking him to uproot himself. You try going home and telling your wife, we're going on a trip, but you've no idea where to. You've no idea what accommodation there's going to be when you arrive. You've no idea how long for. You see how well that idea goes down. Forget about it. He had no preparation, no capacity for planning at all. He was stepping into the unknown, literally. How is he supposed to know what they're going to eat, where they're going to sleep? Any common thoughts? He had people he was taking a responsibility for. True, he didn't have kids at that point, but he had people he was taking responsibility for. He had Lloyd, he had the family, he had people. Can't just ignore them. And what about his spirituality? He sat in his, at that point in his life, at this point in his life, Avrom Avinu was sitting there learning Torah, teaching Torah. That's what he did all day. Well, how well does that work when you're traveling on a journey where you've no idea how long it's going to take? So some Mefarshim, Ksav Sofer, Emes Yaakov, they say that the brachas that Hashem promised Yaakov Avinu was precisely because of this concern. Hashem says to Avram Avinu, don't worry about the fact that you're going to be journeying and you may lose out on your spirituality. Don't worry, I'll give you brachas. You'll be blessed. But that was the point of the brachas, to counteract the genuine concern that Avram Avinu would have. What about his spirituality? Don't underestimate the challenge. As I say, the question was an unfair question. Don't underestimate the challenge of Avram Avinu being asked to pack his bags to move to the unknown. He arrives in Eretz Yisrael after a long, arduous journey. You can imagine some of his people were definitely cranky by then. When can we sit down and have a good steak? Come on. Boom, he arrives. Vayhi rov ba'aretz. It's a famine. What a strop. He's made such an effort to get here. He's finally arrived, and when he arrives, it's not even suitable. He can't even feed anyone. Everyone's starving. There's a famine. What a disaster. And Rashi says straight away on the pasuk, this was the next test to see, you managed so far. Let's see if you manage this one. So you managed to get here without complaining. Very good. You believe in Hashem till now. But now that you've arrived, you expect a bit of a red carpet scenario and you get nothing. You get a famine. Straight into Nisai number 2. Incredible. So how did Avrom Avinu manage then? Tough Nisai number 1, straight into Nisai number 2, and it doesn't stop there. If you read through the 10 Nisyonis, it's one after the next, after the next. So in life, there's a concept called survival mechanism, where people go through difficulty and they just get through it. They manage to get through it. I remember when about 13 years ago, unfortunately, I lost a niece. My sister lost a child, 2.5 years old. And the Shloshim, the end of the Shloshim was going to be Ben Azmanim. So they were going to make some sort of gathering in the family at Siyam for the Shloshim. And it was being held in one of my sister's houses here in Manchester. So we went sort of as the family, everyone gathered together there. And it was all very raw still. It was literally a very big shock. It was a cot death. It was something that no one obviously had expected or anything like that. And I remember walking into the house. I remember sort of mentioning to one of the family members that, it's feeling a bit odd. How's it going to be? They said to me, don't, hold tight. It'll be over in a few minutes. It's almost like you want to get through a difficulty. There's a concept of just clenching your fists, grit your teeth, just get through it. If Avrom Avinu would have taken this approach, I guarantee you he would not have survived. Because he may have gotten through stage 1. Because every time someone complains and says, it's a bit uncomfortable on the way, you say, no, Hashem knows what's best. We'll get there. Don't worry. Let the kids in the car. When are we going to get there? We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. You can encourage, you can push up to a point. And then you arrive in Eretz Yisrael, there's a famine. There's no way in the world, in my mind, Avrom Avinu's approach here was just to survive, just to get through, and we'll manage. Because there's a limit to that. But rather, it's Emuna. Emuna means that you're in a situation which is difficult, but you're present in that difficulty. You face the reality as it is, with all the difficulty, with all the hardship. Yes, you may even be nervous about the unknown, but Emuna means in that moment to still believe with a clarity of mind, I'm in good hands, Hashem's looking after me. And it's a type of mindset which is not just a survival mechanism. It's not just, we'll get through it because I'll have to get through it. And in a few minutes, I'll get through some more. It's a presence. It's being comfortable in the unknown. There's a pasuk in Geheles, which whenever we read on Sukkot, always had it a bit difficult. But in preparation for this year, I think I have an understanding of it. Pasuk says, Perik Aleph Pasuk Yitches, the Yosef Das, Yosef Machoyev. An increase in wisdom, an increase in knowledge is an increase in pain. Now, Kehelis is full of truisms. One day, I'd love to give a series of Shurim on Kehelis just to learn it properly myself. It's got so much truth in it, so much wisdom in it, it's incredible. But this really bothered me. Surely, the wiser a person is, the more understanding a person has, surely the better life they have. Why is it the case that the Pasuk is laying out that if you increase in knowledge, it's an increase in pain? How can that be? But then I thought, perhaps, when we talk about increase in knowledge, what we mean is an increase in certainty. The more a person lives with certainty about their life, they know where they're going to sleep at night, they know what happens in the schedule of the day, they've got everything worked out to the T, and things work like clockwork. If that's how a person's life plays out, then as soon as it gets a bit shaky, because life does get shaky, stuff happens, they can't cope. The more knowledge a person has, it doesn't mean the more wisdom in terms of depths of wisdom. I'm just suggesting a chat here. It means the more a person thinks they know about life, the more they think they can rely upon within their own knowledge, the more pain they're going to have. Rather, let a person understand. Of course, we try and make structure in life. Of course, we try and organize things. But ultimately, it's not me. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The quicker a person arrives at that point, the easier time he'll have with life when real life scenarios hit him and stuff doesn't go that smooth. In other words, what I'm saying is the test of Emuna, the test of Avrom Avinu was to be comfortable in the unknown. Because to be comfortable in the unknown means you're comfortable without even knowing anything. You're just okay. Rav Melech Biderman says over a story, which I think is a great story. And I'm hopeful by the time I tell you the story to its ending, you'll understand why I think it's a great story. He tells over a story about a Ger Chassid who lived in Tel Aviv. He possibly still does, I don't know. He was a teacher, a rebbe in Tel Aviv, in a cheder. And one day in the middle of class, he abruptly leaves the classroom and goes to the office to make a phone call. And the phone call went like this. He calls home and he says to his wife, did you throw out my rekelach, his long coats, the Geras wear their long Hasidic coats. Did you chuck out my rekel? And the wife says, yeah, it's chucked out. He says, can you just go downstairs where the rubbish is taken to and just check? Maybe it's still there. Or maybe the dustbin lorries had come and taken it away already. So she goes downstairs, she comes back up, says, no, it's all gone, it's finished. He says, thanks very much. He puts the phone down, he goes back to class and he carries on teaching. Later on, the manal calls him in and says, tell me, what on earth are you doing? Middle of class, you make a phone call, you ask about your rekelach, about the rubbish, you go back, you teach, what happened, what's going on? He said, look, I'm making a chasna soon. So I borrowed $50,000 cash. And I was thinking of a place to keep it for safekeeping. And I thought of my old rekelach, my old unused long coats. And that's where I put my $50,000. Just this morning in the middle of class, I suddenly remembered that my wife had said to me she wants to throw them out. So I went to make the phone call to see if I could catch them before she shucks them out. Turns out I was too late. The rekelach had gone. So Manal says to him, you mean you lost $50,000 now? You've lost $50,000 and you go back to carry on teaching your class as if nothing has happened? So the Ger Chassid said, yes, I had a Rebbe in my youth who said, there are moments in life where you have to realize, if not for this moment, why were you born? Hashem will provide. And that's the end of the story. And that's why I think it's a great story. Because there's many stories of Hashgacha Pratis, and they should also be said, and one should get chizuk from them. How it all works out in the end. He went down the road and he tripped over and he found $50,000 on the floor. But that's no shtick. If that's how life works all the time, then it's a no-brainer to be Ma'amin in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the difficulty, without the light at the end of a tunnel. without being able to see how this actually can work out. You've no idea. It looks tough. It feels tough. It is tough. Even so. There's a medrash, Lekach Tov, Psikta Zutrasa. Very interesting medrash. He says, on the Pasuk, El Ha'oretz Asher Areka, we said, Avrom Avinu wasn't told where he was going to go. This journey was open-ended. Says the medrash, Nisoyon b'soich nisoyon. This was a challenge on top of a challenge. Ki lo hoidia ono yelech. Hashem didn't tell him where he was going. So far, so good. Says the medrash, Simon Lebanov. This is a sign to his children. Shelo yegale lohem kitz golusam. Hashem is not going to reveal the end of the golus. What's the connection? The end of a golus. Avrom Avinu being told where to go. What's going on? Because when you know the end point of a challenge, that takes away from the challenge. Imagine a person, the weight of her children, and they're married, they're 25 years old, they've been married a year or two, and they've no idea how long the wait might be. They wait 7 years. It's a long wait. Every year, every day is a difficult challenge. What happens if they have a prophecy right at the beginning of their journey, and they're told from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, you're going to have to wait 7.5 years. But once you wait 7.5 years, you're going to have twins, you're going to have quadruples, you're going to have whatever. You're going to have a lot. You're a nice, happy family. How hard would it be to wait the 7.5 years? Might not be a walk in the park. We'll be pretty close to it. What's the big deal? Wait 7.5 years. Hashem's told you 7.5 years. The minute you know the end point of the challenge, it takes away the challenge. We don't know when Mashiach is supposed to come. We don't know how long the Golus is going to go for. That's half the challenge. We've been waiting 2,000 years for the Gula. We still don't know. It's a long wait. What happens if Hashem would have told us from the beginning, it might take a long time, but it's going to come at a specific point? We'll take away from the challenge. That's the connection. Avrom Avinu wasn't told where he was going to go. Every step was a step into uncertainty. Every step was a challenge. Every moment, every day was another case of, am I crazy? Taking these thousands of people on a journey that I have no idea where we're going because Hashem told me to go, and then saying, no, we believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's going to be good. It is good. But I don't know how it's going to work out. It's good. When I go in the valley of death, says David HaMelech, valley of death isn't a pleasant place. The valley of death isn't a tunnel where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The valley of death is a gloomy place. Whilst I'm going through the difficulty, I am not afraid because you are with me. That is the clarity. That is the mindset. That is the clear mindset of a ma'amin. Not because they know how it's going to work out, because they believe it will work out in the end for the good. Because right now in the difficulty, they have the presence of mind to be able to see the truth and understand that Hashem is with them, and it's good. Rabbi Osher Weiss recently told over that he heard himself from the Klosenberger Rebbe, who lost his wife and 11 children in the Holocaust. Never once, said the Klosenberger Rebbe about himself, never once did I question HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout the entire Holocaust. That's a level. Because Gam ki elech v'geit al moves. It can look gefährlich, it can look terrible, it can feel painful. Hashem's with me. There's a famous Holocaust survivor by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Weiss. He lived in Manchester. He was a shaykhid, he was part of the MH Chavra Kadisha, he was nifta about 10 years ago. And he tells over this story by himself. He was a Holocaust survivor, he was a kid in the Holocaust, and there's videos of it online, you can see his story. He tells over how he was in the gas chambers as a kid with a friend. As we know, once Yidden were taken into gas chambers, that was the end of it, pretty much. And he turned to his friend and he says, my father every year, Seder night, would say over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He'd say over the story of how the Jewish people were saved from Mitzrayim, b'chi pozen, in a hurry. This wasn't a case of a slow, long, drawn-out geula. This was 1 second to the next. Hashem whipped them out of Mitzrayim. He turned to his friend, he says, Hashem can save us from here too. The next second, the door bursts open. The Nazi comes in, and it was recorded in history as the famous moment when the Nazis saved 50 Jews in this way. pulled out 50 men to go do some work, hard labor. Never happened before, never happened since. In the entirety of the Holocaust, it never happened. But for him, it happened. Nazis took him out, and he lived to tell the tale. Think of the presence of mind of a kid who was so mechunach, who was so educated in his Emuna, in Emuna Pshuta, that in the moment of difficulty, Gam ki elech legeitz almavas, literally, he was standing in the gas chamber. He hadn't forgotten about his Baruch Hu. Now, sounds good, but here's the key. If you want to live like this, of course you have to be honest with yourself. There's no point if a person feels sad, if a person feels pain, they just wave it away, say, oh, Emuna, Emuna. Emuna has to come from a clarity, has to come from an insight, has to come from a true way of seeing things. It has to come from a person having seen the truth. It took Avrom Avinu 37 years until he was at a point where this actually served him. And that's why I think that when it's not a time of crisis for a person, when a person's having a neutral time in life, that's the time when a person should build their framework so that they have a solid basis to their emunah. If you spend the time when it's not a time of crisis to ponder, to wonder, to try and seek the truth, then it will serve you at a time of crisis because you know, even if you can't see it, and even if it doesn't always feel grand, but you have a knowledge, you have a pursuit of truth, a clarity which you know on a level of knowledge which will pull you through. We asked the question, why doesn't the Torah give us details about the background of Avrom Avinu? What was the background of Avinu? Essentially, he had a journey of 37 years till he found Hashem. Imagine a apostle. And there was Avrom Avinu at 3 years old, started wondering about Hashem. And 37 years later, he reached the conclusion, Hashem runs the world. We know the Torah doesn't say anything that's irrelevant. Every word of the Torah is accounted for. Torah never tells us the weather. I mean, we know in Noach it was wet. I mean, it was hot. But in between, no idea. We don't know the weather because it's not relevant. We don't even know what people wore, the clothes they wore. We know Yosef Atzadik had a nice coat. That was it. We don't know about anything else. Only what's relevant the Torah writes. Therefore, every word that the Torah does right, we're able to darshan from it. Look at the Gemara. Gemara's full of droshes. From every word and half a letter the Torah does or doesn't say. Had the Torah written Avrom Avinu's journey to Emuna, there would have been a very strong possibility that people would have drawn the wrong lessons and the wrong conclusions from it. Just think about it. I'm 34 years old. I read the Torah. Avrom Avinu went searching for Hashem from 3 years old until he was 40 years old. Great, I've got time. There's a big danger that people could wrongly think, oh, if Avrom Avinu did that, then I could do that. The Torah doesn't record personal experiences because they are personal. The Torah records things that are factual, what happened, who said what, and they are full and rich with lessons that we can learn, but the Torah is not going to teach us something which is personal. And Avrom Avinu's journey to Emuna was personal, and so is our journey to Emuna. Every person's on their own journey, with their own life experience, with their own prodding in their life, from stuff that will make them think. Torah is not going to lay the groundwork for how it should be. Everyone's on their own journey. We asked 3 questions. How old Avrom Avinu was? We said he started his journey when he was 3, he finished it when he was 40. We asked, what was the challenge of Lech Lecha? We've established the Lech Lecha challenge was going into the unknown, without a time frame, without a clear destination, without a plan. Hashem sent him into the unknown. Why does the Torah not give us an introduction to Avrom Avinu? Because what should the introduction be? His personal journey, his personal experience? It's personal. The Torah wants to teach us the fundamentals, and it teaches us that through the story of the nisyonos that Avrom Avinu went through. The central takeaway, Rabbi Yisai, from this, I believe, is Emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu means that even when it's difficult, Gam ki eilech v'geitz al moves, remember and be clear, Lo yirara ki ato imodi.